So, first of all, let's talk about the by-election that happened just last week in Richmond. Just how much of a shock was that to you?
Do you know, it wasn't, because I was down there campaigning. I thought it was close, but we probably wouldn't do it about, I don't know, a week out. But in the last few days, as we felt the vote move, I just no doubt that that's what was going to be the result. In fact, even just a secret, I've never told anybody else, I put some money on it and won. How about that? Don't often do that in politics.
So, as well as obviously you winning some money, it was a great night for the Lib Dems as a whole. But do you
Well,
think...
it was a great night, I think, if you don't mind. Obviously, a good night for us, but a great night for those who believe passionately, as I do, that it would be disastrous if this government now institutes a hard Brexit. I mean, there will be thousands, hundreds of thousands, possibly millions of jobs resting on that. We've already massively diminished the influence of our country. Who wants to come to London to influence anything now? American presidents fly straight over London and Lincolnshire, of course, to get to Berlin. And now, we have a position which we can have influence in the world by snuggling as close to the most isolationist American president of all time, who thinks he can now appoint our ambassadors. So I think this is a really big issue which affects the future. We believe, and Ross Pepper is standing on it, as indeed am I, first of all, that a hard Brexit that took us away from Europe into some raft in the middle of the Atlantic is very bad for Britain. And secondly, that since they wouldn't say what the destination was during the election, when the government has done the deal, I think the British people have a right to say whether it's good enough or not, and if not, tell the government to go back and negotiate again.
Well, I was just about to say, obviously you think that it sends a clear message to Theresa May, but will it actually make any difference, the election of Sarah Olney?
Oh, yeah, I think it will. In fact, I think in many ways, it's emboldened. The Prime Minister was forced to climb down to give her plan on Brexit. There was a vote on that last night. That was almost directly a result of the fact that Tory MPs said, hang on, we could lose to the Lib Dems now, so you need to be a bit more flexible. She was. And I remember when I was party leader saying it's very rarely in a by-election that you could influence Downing Street. It has happened. It happened in Christchurch, where we said if they voted Lib Dem, we get rid of the poll tax, and they did. It happened in Ribble Valley, when we said if they voted Lib Dem, we get rid of Margaret Thatcher, and we did. And I think in these by-elections, Witney and Sleaford and Hykeham, I think there is the likelihood, in fact the certainty, that the voice of the people speaking in the ballot box in those constituencies will be heard very resonantly and very quickly in number 10 Downing Street.
Now, the Lib Dems would have to overturn a similar-sized majority in Sleaford to win this by-election, but 62% of people who voted to leave the EU. Do you seriously think the Lib Dems have any chance of taking this by-election?
Yeah, I mean, we fight to win. What else would you do? So, of course, and Ross is an outstanding local candidate who's, Lincolnshire born and bred, and understands the problems and fighting a terrific campaign. So, yeah, of course, we're out there to win. But, the electorate will do. I've never predicted the outcome of elections, but I may have had private positions, but I've never publicly predicted the outcome of an election because I think it's a sort of arrogance to the electorate. But we're in with a really good chance, and it depends how people vote how voted today.
Now, it's nearly been 6 months since that referendum. Do you think that the British public made a mistake on June the 23rd?
Yeah, I do. I just speak bluntly. It was a mistake, but the British public has spoken. I'm a Democrat. I adhere and obey to their, whatever I think. It's their voice speaking in the ballot box that gives me my command, and we must carry that out. I think it's a mistake which history will regard as probably one of the greatest self-inflicted wounds a nation's ever done to itself. I think the economic downside of this will not be felt, but will be felt very powerfully, but will not be felt probably until the middle to the end of next year. And as I said elsewhere, I said earlier, it has massively diminished our country's influence in Europe, in the world, by the way. So I don't think it's a good idea. But look, I may be wrong. I've been wrong before. And in the end, whether I'm right or wrong, the democratic judgment of the British people speaking in the ballot box is we want to leave, and now we must do our best to put that into operation. And I think we will do that, but I think we will insist, Lib Dems, that this is not a hard Brexit, that it's a Brexit that preserves jobs and, by the way, preserves influence, And that given the fact that the No campaigners refused ever to tell us what their model was, there is a decision, and we have now, the public have decided on a departure, but not on a destination. And since a difference between a hard Brexit and a soft Brexit can mean massive amounts in terms of lost job and influence, I think the British people have a right to say on the outcome. What started off as a democratic exercise in the ballot box can't end up as a stitch-up in the government.
So what would you say to those people who say if you held a second referendum after the negotiations have finished, then that just gives the European Union an excuse to give us a rubbish deal which the British people will reject?
On the contrary, I think the European Union very, very much wants to make sure that we get in, because it's in their interest. They want us to be as close as possible to the European Union. It's in their interest and in ours. By the way, the United States would say the same thing. It's only this government that really wants to sort of cast adrift from the continent and try and pretend Britain's a little raft like Singapore floating in the middle of the Atlantic that's going to have super free trade by the time we get there. By the way, we'll have wrecked our society. I don't think anybody else wants that, but the government does. I don't think the European Union wants to give us a hard deal. I think they want to make it as easy for us as possible because it's to their benefit and ours that they do so. And by the way, exactly the same people who are now saying, that is the Brexiteers, who are now saying, oh, well, if you have a second referendum, they'll give us a hard deal. Or they're exactly the same people who said during the referendum, no, it's in their interest to give us a good deal. Well, if it applied then, why doesn't it apply now?
So when Theresa May became the leader of the Conservatives, she said Brexit means Brexit and we're going to make a success of it. Do you think that Brexit could be a success, or do you simply see the upcoming negotiations as trying to get the best out of a bad situation?
I have no doubt that, for my money, in my judgment, that it would have been better if we hadn't. Whatever success we have in Britain would have been easier to achieve and probably bigger if we'd have stayed in, when we could have really made a contribution to Europe, which is moving in our direction now. I mean, European friends might say, where are you leaving when you want everything? The language in Europe is now English, and you're on your way. You're now having, more influence than ever. Anyway, leave that to one side. It would have been easier and better, and I think our country would have been more prosperous in. But that's not the decision of the British people. Our job now is to make the best deal of it we can, and that's why I think the British people have a right, when it comes to the deal, to say, do they agree, or do they not agree, in which case the government has to go back and think again.
And just a final word on your leader, Tim Farron. Do you think he is the man to bring back electoral success to the Liberal Democrats? Do you think he's doing a good job?
I think he's doing an outstanding job. I mean, it's his position that the party's taken on Europe, a brave position, a clear position. I mean, if you think of 52% to 48%, which is how the people, 48% wanted to stay in the European Union. By the way, I think that's gone up since. And a lot of people I've spoken to who voted out say, whoops, we didn't really mean to do that. We'd like to stay in. So who else have they got to vote for? No other party has been as clear and unequivocal about the fact that we demand a second referendum. We demand that the government, if it's got to be out, makes the deal which gives us the best chance for the future. And we hold to the position that if ever there were to be a second referendum, and who knows in the distance there might be, we hold to our position that Britain's better in Europe than out. Who else would be able to vote for that? What other party would you vote for? Because it's only the Liberal Democrats that stand for those things.